Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another true crime video. And today we are picking back up with part 2 of the Hannah Weshee case. We are continuing on with the trial, which will include Lindsay's version of events as well as her attorney's defense for her, which is basically that Lindsay Partin is completely and 100% innocent, and the most likely culprit for what happened to Hannah is Jason Weshee, Hannah's father. If you haven't seen part 1, you should go and watch that first because 1 always comes before 2, and I have linked it in the description box for you. But as a quick recap, 3-year-old Hannah Weshee was rushed to Fort Hamilton Hospital in Ohio after collapsing on the morning of March 8, 2018. An hour after arriving at Fort Hamilton, Hannah was airlifted to Cincinnati Children's Hospital, where she underwent emergency brain surgery to drain a large subdural hemorrhage that was causing the midline of Hannah's brain to shift to one side. So essentially, Hannah's brain was moving in her skull, and it's not supposed to do that. During the surgery, Hannah's brain was so inflamed that it began to swell out of the area where a piece of her skull had been removed, and she was unresponsive after surgery for several days, resulting in her being removed from life support on March 18th. Several medical professionals who treated Hannah and who saw her brain scans, as well as the medical examiner who performed her autopsy, they all believed that the injury which had caused Hannah to become unconscious had happened moments before she collapsed, and the damage to her brain had most likely happened as a result of being shaken. After being interviewed by detectives on March 8th and March 9th, Hannah's babysitter, Lindsay Partin, was asked about her version of events from that morning, and after changing her story multiple times, Lindsay admitted to slapping Hannah upside the head, picking her up and squeezing Hannah around the middle of her body hard, poking Hannah aggressively in the chest multiple times, and punching Hannah under her chin with an uppercut closed fist several times and shaking Hannah more than once. Lindsay admitted to all of these things. She freely confessed these things to the police. The detectives didn't say to Lindsay, "Hey, did you uppercut Hannah? Did you poke her in the chest with your finger?" They didn't give her this version of events. She came up with it all on her own. But then during the trial, Lindsay claimed she'd made all of that up because she had thought that it was what the police wanted to hear, and she didn't want anyone to get in trouble, and she didn't believe that she would be in trouble for making these claims because it was her belief that Hannah's father, Jason Weshee, would back her up. This is going to be a long video, so run to the bathroom, grab a drink, grab a snack, whatever it is that you need to be ready to sit here with me for the next hour and a half or more. But before we dive in, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Magellan TV. Magellan TV is a documentary streaming service built by those who know what makes a gripping true story come to life, and those are documentary filmmakers. They believe that television should be both entertaining and enlightening, and that is why they've searched the globe for films and series that have the most dramatic imagery, the most cutting-edge subjects, and the most authentic insights from the world's top historians, scientists, and explorers. I love Magellan TV, and I love history. It is and always will be my first passion and the thing that brings me the most joy in life, besides like my family and the people I love. And recently, I've been on a French history kick. Over the past 15 years or so, I've devoured everything I could find about British history, Spanish history, Russian history, and what I love the most is learning about the badass women who've managed to thrive and survive despite everything being stacked against them. Isabella of Spain, the warrior queen for whom my youngest daughter is named for. This is a woman who climbed on her horse and led her forces into battle. Not only did she fight with her armies, she was at the head of the pack. She's badass. I love it. And that's why today I have a great recommendation for you. It's called She-Wolves, England's Early Queens. Over the course of 3 visually stunning episodes, you'll learn more about the mothers of Western civilization. My favorite episode was the first one, where they cover Eleanor of Aquitaine, but they're all amazing. They all stream in 4K, so as I said, visually stunning. And Magellan TV doesn't just have history documentaries, they also have true crime documentaries, science documentaries, nature documentaries. Whatever you're interested in, they have tons of content to keep you busy, watching, and learning. With over 3,000 titles currently available and more being added every single week, you'll never get bored. And Magellan TV is easy to watch at home. It's compatible with Roku, Amazon Fire TV, smart TVs, and it's also easy to watch your favorite documentaries on the go using your phone, tablet, or laptop. If you want to give Magellan TV a try for yourself, all you have to do is click on the link in the description box and start your 30-day trial with no strings attached. There's no contract, there's no fine print. You can cancel anytime, but I don't think you're going to want to. Thank you so much to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video and being a friend to this channel for a very long time. I really appreciate it. And if you guys appreciate this channel and what it brings to you, then you should support Magellan TV because they support me. Let's dive into the video. So one of the people who testified, I believe halfway through the trial, was a woman named Paula Smith. And this is the stepmother of Lindsay's husband, TJ Smith. So I guess you could call Paula Smith Lindsay Partin's mother-in-law, but not really, because we find out from Paula that Lindsay and TJ, they weren't legally married at all. Paula also lived on Shank Road, I assume with Lindsay's father, and this is the same street, if you remember, that both Lindsay Partin and Jason Weshee lived on, and Paula lived next door to Lindsay and TJ, so I'm assuming on the other side of Lindsay's house because Jason Weshee lived on one side and Paula lived on the other. So Paula testified that although Lindsay and TJ had a wedding ceremony where people came and watched them exchange vows, etc., they hadn't actually filed for a marriage license, and it was over a year, before she found out that their marriage wasn't legal.
Do you know the defendant, Lindsay Partin?
I do.
How do you know her?
She married my stepson,
And what's his name?
TJ Smith.
Do you know them to be married?
I know they had a wedding.
Did you ever learn that they were not married?
Yes.
Approximately how long after the wedding did you learn that it was not a formal marriage?
Over a year.
So later, when Lindsay is on the stand and she's being examined by her attorney, she's asked about this, and she has a different story to tell.
Are you married?
To me, I'm married.
Okay, and what does that mean?
We had a wedding. We went for a marriage license, but TJ's uncle that married us forgot it the day we got married, and we went on our honeymoon, and we got back. It wasn't important to me. A piece of paper is not important to me. Marriage to me is making a commitment to the person and to God. Anybody can walk away with a piece of paper.
Okay.
It just wasn't important.
You heard some testimony yesterday from Paula Smith.
I did.
And you also, I think you started your testimony today talking about that you're not technically married to TJ, right? You had a ceremony. You had a wedding. Were people there?
Yes.
All right, family showed up. Did you wear a white dress?
I did.
And I think your testimony today is that the marriage license is just a piece of paper.
To me.
But ma'am, you didn't actually tell your family that you weren't married until about a year later, is that right?
No, they all knew.
They all knew, okay. So when Paula testified that she didn't find out until a year later, that was a lie?
Yes.
Okay. And ma'am, isn't it true that you didn't get married to TJ? You didn't do a marriage license so you could continue to collect government benefits?
No.
Check this form. Come on, approach.
So according to Lindsay, a piece of paper was never important to her. It's not important to God, so it's not important to her. But Lindsay claims that TJ's stepmother is lying when Paula claimed that the family didn't know that they were not legally married for over a year. When the prosecutor asks if it's true that Lindsay and TJ didn't get married so that Lindsay could keep collecting government benefits, Lindsay finds this to be very funny and ludicrous because no one has ever done that before, right? Nobody's ever just like not gotten married so that they could continue to collect money from the government. That's insane. That's like, what is this, a conspiracy theory? So Lindsay does some babysitting for Hannah and another little girl that Lindsay calls KK. And I'm sure that the money Lindsay was receiving for those services was paid to her in cash and under the table. Like, I'm sure she's not claiming it to the government. She also says that she has a job doing paperwork for her father's business, Smith Construction Corp. She's been doing this since she was 16 as like a part-time job while she was in high school. And once again, I have to believe that the money she got from doing that was also under the table, at least a portion of it, because it's her dad's company. Once again, this happens. This is common knowledge. When you work for your dad or your mom or like a family business, you're not always claiming everything that you're getting. It's kind of like on the side. Now, the fact that the prosecutor asked Lindsay about government benefits, it tells me that it's already been looked into and Lindsay is collecting money from the government. So it's not a huge stretch that she would not want to be legally married to a man who has a full-time job and makes a pretty good, salary, because then TJ's income would become her income in the eyes of the law, and she'd no longer be eligible for government assistance. Back to Paula Smith. She claimed that she and Lindsay got along very well. I mean, they were family, they were neighbors, they were friends. They spoke on the phone and via text quite often. And on the morning of March 8th, Paula Smith received a call from her husband, Lindsay's father, saying that one of the kids that Lindsay babysat was hurt. So Paula went over to Lindsay's house, and at that point, the police and the EMTs were already there. So Paula offered to stay with Lindsay's kids while Lindsay went to the hospital to visit with Hannah and check in on Hannah. And while there at Lindsay's house, Paula and her daughter cleaned up the place because it was a mess, and Paula wanted to help Lindsay, and she knew that Lindsay had not been in the best headspace recently. Now, Paula Smith did not want to be on camera during her testimony, so the camera is on Lindsay while Paula is speaking. So watch Lindsay's reaction.
We cleaned up the house because it was a mess. I wanted to help out
Wanted to help who?
Lindsay.
Did you know there was a criminal investigation going on?
No,
Why did you clean the house?
because I knew she had been pretty down and going through some things, and the house was a mess, and I wanted to help her.
So when Lindsay testified, she once again said that Paula Smith was not being honest, and she and her attorney went through pictures of her home that police took on the morning of March 8th.
You're looking at those photographs.
Yes.
Is your house cleaned?
No.
What's not clean about your house?
There's still toys all over the floor. My counter has sippy cups and apple juice out. My creamer for coffee is still out. The coffee pot and coffee cup are still sitting there. Stuff on the stove from the night before.
Your beds aren't made?
Beds are not made. There are toys in the living room, blankets on the couch, baby dolls on the floor, a purse they played with, clothes in the guest room piled up on the bed, my makeup and girl stuff on my vanity.
So to be fair, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that my home was clean either if I was going through those pictures. Like there's stuff on the counters, there's toys all over, etc. But at the same time, Paula Smith was not Lindsay's cleaning lady, so she wasn't really expected to do like a detailed cleaning. Like she's not going to be putting your makeup away. Paula may have wiped some counters down, maybe cleaned a toilet, maybe wiped the bathroom vanity down, but she also doesn't live there. So she doesn't know where all the toys go or where your clothes get put away. And I personally wouldn't feel comfortable going into someone else's bedroom and like making their bed. Paula Smith is not a professional house cleaner, so she probably just, went and picked some things up and just trying to keep her hands busy, so she felt like she was doing whatever she could to help. So when Lindsay returned to the house, Paula Smith said that Lindsay was frantic, and she kept asking Paula where a specific toy was because it needed to be put back where it had been immediately. And that's the toy train that allegedly Hannah fell off of on March 7th and hit her face on.
What was she frantic about?
We had cleaned up the house, and there was a toy that she was kept asking about and told me to, I told her I cleaned it up and put the toys away, and she said to go get it right now and put it right back right now.
And what was that toy?
A toy train, a ride-on train.
During Lindsay's testimony, we get a better understanding, once again, of how much she would charge Jason to watch Hannah, depending on how long Hannah would be there and how many meals Lindsay had to feed her. Lindsay claimed that Jason would typically drop Hannah off between 6:30 and 7 a.m., and he would pick her up between 6 and 7 p.m. But if it was a rainy day or a day with bad weather, Jason wouldn't work, so Hannah would not get dropped off at all. So if it was a full day and she had to feed Hannah breakfast, lunch, and dinner, Lindsay would charge $35. But if it was a half day, she would only charge $25. However, it did appear that Jason had fallen behind on his payments and he was consistently playing catch up, and Lindsay kept track of this in the Notes app on her phone.
When he would owe you something, you would jot that down as well.
Yes, ma'am.
And so it looks like if we go through that document, you would indicate when he paid. So right here it says paid $140. So I'm trying to find that here. But then owes $320. So you would mark when he paid. Is that right?
And then the balance.
And then the balance and what he owes. So as of February 1st, it looks like he owed you $425. And then it says owes $225. So that would have been the balance.
Yes,
Because he had
ma'am.
paid you. All right. Looks like as of February 12th, he owed you $190. As of February 15th, $330. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. You have no reason to doubt that these numbers are correct?
No.
Okay. And it says there in the final, owes $260 as of February 28th, and that's kind of where you left it. It hadn't
Yes,
been
ma'am.
updated since then. Because Hannah would get dropped off so early, you would prepare and feed her breakfast. Is that fair?
I fed them all breakfast.
Fed them all. So KK was already there, and you would feed them all breakfast?
Yes, ma'am.
And you would prepare and feed her lunch.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think that you said in one of your interviews that you would sometimes wash her clothes if they were dirty.
Every once in a while.
Okay.
More
Throw them in with the rest of the kids' clothes?
Mainly like her jacket and her blanket.
Okay. Because those got used a lot?
Yeah.
Sometimes you had a bather.
Every once in a while.
And I think you said in one of your interviews that she was kind of finicky about her hair. Is that
She
right?
was.
All right. And you said, I think you said that you would try to fix it, maybe put it in a ponytail, and she was not having any of it.
Any of it. My
Right.
youngest one's the same way.
And I think that you've stated before that if Dad was really late picking her up, you would feed her dinner too.
Absolutely.
All right. So I think you said one time you fed her a Skyline chili bake.
Yes, ma'am.
Early on when you started watching Hannah, were the hours a little bit more consistent, 7 to 5?
Not necessarily. He had gotten a new car. He would work on that after work and make sure that I was okay with that, which I was. He sometimes would run errands and ask me if that was okay.
Okay.
There were times he was in the process of, I think, trying to get a divorce, so he would go run those kinds of errands, and I was,
And you would just hold on to Hannah at that point?
yes.
As time went on, it seemed like you were watching her a little bit more closer to that 12 hours. Isn't that right?
Depended on what day it was, yeah.
But it wasn't unusual for it to be a 12-hour day.
No, ma'am.
And Lindsay acts like she's perfectly okay with all of this, right? Getting up early to take care of Hannah, even though KK wouldn't get dropped off until later and her own children didn't wake up until later, preparing and serving several meals a day, taking care of someone else's 3-year-old for 12 hours a day, sometimes having to wash her clothes, sometimes having to give her baths. She was not put out or bothered by this at all, according to her. And we learn a little bit more about how Lindsay came to watch Hannah. Basically, she claims her husband TJ just told her one Sunday night, like, hey, we hired a new mechanic and I want you to watch his daughter. But when it came to light that Jason and Hannah would be moving next door to Lindsay, She initially claimed she didn't have a problem with this at all. Not bothered. Not totally cash.
TJ Smith, he kind of sprung it on you that you'd be watching Hannah. Is that right?
Yeah, he asked me on a Sunday night.
And he said he had hired a new mechanic and he needed you to watch his kid.
He asked me if I would.
Okay, but that was kind of how it came about. That was the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And initially you thought that was just going to be a temporary situation.
I don't know if I necessarily thought it was going to be temporary, but that was my assumption.
And before Hannah was added in the mix in June of 2017, Kaylin was dropped off. Your previous testimony, I think in your interview, was that she was dropped off about 8 a.m. Does that sound right?
7:50, yeah.
And so now when watching Hannah, you'd have to get up an hour earlier.
I was usually up anyway.
But that was kind of the expectation. She's
Yeah.
coming an hour earlier. You got to be up for that.
Yes.
And sometimes it was even earlier than that. Is that right?
Yes.
Sometimes as early as 6:10.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay, and you had her 4 days a week,
Yes.
Monday through Thursday. And when Jason moved in, he was already working for Smith Corps. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you weren't really thrilled about the prospect of Jason moving in. Is that right?
No, I thought it was fine.
You weren't afraid that he was going to dump his kids on you?
No, I enjoyed all three of them.
But then the prosecutor has Lindsay read out loud a text that she had sent to a friend of hers on July 17th, 2017, stating the exact opposite of what she had just testified to.
Ms. Partin, I want to direct your attention to an outgoing message that you would have sent on what appears to be July 17th of 2017 at 1:03 p.m. Can you please read that statement for the jury?
Sure.
Starting with So Roger.
So Roger texted Jason last night asking him if he wanted the house next door. First off, not his house to give out to rent. And second, I'm concerned about Jason and the kids moving in there. I just have a feeling he's going to put his kids on me all the time, and that will be here all the time, and I can't handle that. I need space from work stuff. And I'm worried about the pond with kids. Like, they can't be down there by themselves or whenever they feel like it. I feel stressed out so bad. It's always something I can't control, and I hate it.
It does sound like she wasn't happy about Jason moving in next door, which is fine, completely understandable. I get needing that space, needing that, difference between when I'm working and when I'm not working, when I'm with your kid and when I'm with my kid. No one wants to be a built-in babysitter, but why not just be honest about that, right? It seems like Lindsay has this need to be viewed as the perfect caregiver, the perfect woman, the perfect mother figure who loved hanging out with little kids all day and was not resentful of it at all. But that's really not true or accurate for most women or even men who are full-time caregivers. And it's completely normal to want a little downtime. So why not just say that? I could relate to that. I'm sure every woman on that jury who's ever been a babysitter or a mother could relate to that. No one wants to be around small children 24/7. We need time for ourselves. In fact, I've even personally witnessed this where, I knew a woman who loved her grandkids and babysat her grandkids often, but then when she found out that maybe her daughter, who was the mother of her grandkids, was going to move into the same apartment complex, she was like, oh, shit, I'm going to be watching those kids night and day. And that's a normal concern. That's a valid concern. Why not just say that? Because Lindsay has this desire, this insistence on being seen as perfect, on not being, upset or annoyed about anything. Because I think she thinks that if the jury and the judge and the people hear that, she was a little resentful of it, and she did want a little me time. And it did become a lot to have these 4 small girls constantly, every single day, all the time. She thinks that that's going to lead them to now believe that she's capable of hurting Hannah, when in reality, it's just a normal feeling. And if you ever gave yourself a break or allowed yourself to have a break, you would probably be less likely to be abusive to these children, to take out your frustration and your anger on these children. So the prosecution moves on to Lindsay and her police interviews, and we find out that during Lindsay's first interview on March 8th, one of the detectives, Sergeant Whitlock, had lied to Lindsay and told her that Hannah had passed away, that Hannah was already dead. Now, we know from the timeline that wasn't true because Hannah was still in emergency surgery at this time. She was being airlifted to Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and she wouldn't be declared legally dead until March 18th, 10 days later. Now, Hannah claims that she only found out this wasn't true after the interview when her husband picked her up at the police station, and he was like, hey, let's go to the hospital.
Sergeant Whitlock was present in, do you know who I'm referring to when I say Sergeant Whitlock?
Yes, ma'am.
He was present for your first interview.
Yes.
And he kind of came in and out.
Yes.
And I mean, he's kind of a big guy.
He is.
Yeah, and he's kind of intimidating, right?
Yeah.
And he's got a bald head and a booming voice. I mean, is that a fair characterization?
Fair.
And you heard, not only on direct, but I mean, you watched your interview and you know that he came in and he told you during that first interview on March 8th that Hannah had died.
He did.
Right, and you were aware of that. And at some point you became aware that she was not. She was still living. Is that right? The testimony that you heard was that Sergeant Whitlock told you that she was still alive, but that's not your testimony today.
No, ma'am.
Who told you that she was still alive?
TJ, as we were walking out,
He said she's still alive.
he said, let's go to the hospital. And I said, why? And we had that conversation.
Now, some of you may not agree with this interrogation technique. It's called the Reed technique, and I'd agree with you in some cases, such as when the person being interviewed is a minor or mentally compromised in some way. For me, an example of this would be Jesse Miskelly Jr. during the West Memphis 3 investigation, but it's perfectly legal for a police officer to lie to a suspect during an investigation. And it's important that everyone knows and understands that because whether you're guilty or innocent, the second you sit down with law enforcement, you need to ask for a lawyer, without exception. And Lindsay was given the opportunity to do that more than once.
What I've handed you are your Miranda warnings for March 8th and March 9th, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And those warnings, those were given to you at the sheriff's office both days, is that right?
Yes.
And you would have actually received that card, is that right? At some point during that interview?
Or just
Not to
sign?
keep, but to
Okay.
sign.
Yes, just
All
to
right,
sign.
and your name, I don't know if it's a signature, but your name appears on that document?
Yeah, I printed it in.
You printed in it. And with both States Exhibits 92 and 94, so the Miranda warnings that were given to you on March 8th and March 9th, your name appears on both of those documents?
Yes.
All right, and that would have been your handwriting, is that right? In the second interview that you were with Detective Turner here and Detective Hensley, they went over those warnings again with you, is that
Yes.
right? Okay. And they read them out loud and you had the opportunity to, you can read, is that right?
Yes.
So they read them out loud and you had the opportunity to read along.
Yes.
Remember, Lindsay stated that although she had told the detectives that she'd done all of these things to Hannah, she retracted those statements and then claimed she'd made everything up because she felt pressured and the detectives wouldn't listen to her when she said she had no idea what happened, so she just told them what they wanted to hear. And later she would say that she'd stopped telling the truth in her interview with the police after an hour of being with the detectives in that room, within an hour. So here's what I'm gathering from this, and let me know if I'm off base. 1 hour of being interviewed is not a long time, okay? Certainly not long enough to say that you just broke down and just started telling them what they wanted to hear because you couldn't even anymore. We have cases where suspects are literally grilled for hours, kept in an interrogation room, told they aren't allowed to leave, told they can't call a lawyer, told they can't go to the bathroom, told they can't have a drink. They are basically denied their human rights, their constitutional rights. I would call it torture. And I would also strongly argue that this is not what happened to Lindsay Partin during her interviews, especially if her claim is true that she stopped telling the truth after an hour. How much can you be tortured in an hour? They told her she could call a lawyer. They told her she could stop talking to them. They made that very clear. They offered her drinks. I'm sure she was allowed to get up and go to the bathroom whenever she wanted. She could have walked out of there and left whenever she wanted. So this is not the same. And using instances of when this actually happens to people, usually people of color, usually minorities, usually people who are not mentally capable of understanding their rights, it's offensive to me. It's offensive to me that Lindsay would stand on the backs of those people when she's clearly a grown-ass woman who is smart enough to read her rights, understand them, sign them away, and still sit there because she's trying to make it seem like she's just so casual, so innocent, so trusting. I didn't do anything wrong. I have nothing to hide. It's Lindsay's fault that she was so insistent on making herself look so innocent that she refused to call a lawyer or take advantage of these rights. That's not the police's fault. That's not the detective's fault. That's Lindsay Partin's fault because she thought if she asked for a lawyer, it would make her look guilty. And whether it would or not is not relevant. What matters is if you'd called a lawyer, your lawyer would have never let you make those statements to the detectives, and you might not be in prison today. On March 8th, Lindsay was interviewed for just over 2 hours, and on March 9th, the day she was arrested, she was interviewed for just over 4 hours. So also what I'm hearing is even after Lindsay discovered that she'd been lied to by Detective Whitlock on March 8th, she still went into the police station on March 9th. She still agreed to talk to them. She heard her rights again. She still did not ask for a lawyer. And she still talked to them after knowing that she had been lied to, after knowing that it was possible and legal for them to lie to her. She was not kept in a room for 10 hours. She was not denied a lawyer. And even after she was lied to, she still told the police that she trusted them enough to keep talking to them. In fact, she was like, I don't even have to read this paper. Like, you don't need to read it. I'll just sign it. I know what it says. After she was lied to, which is something she later claims in an appeal was so offensive to her. She couldn't believe that they did it. Then we find out about some internet searches that Lindsay made, and also some internet searches that Lindsay deleted. During her March 8th and March 9th interviews, Lindsay had told the detectives that she'd Googled ways to make a bruise look better and also how to make a bruise feel better. But her actual internet searches are phrased a bit differently, and the time frame doesn't really add up.
And in fact, you were really forthcoming about that. You told detectives in your interview on 3/8, you said, yeah, I Googled bruising.
Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, you were very forthcoming on your second interview and you said, yeah, I Googled bruises in that interview too, right?
ma'am.
Is that right? In your first interview, you told detectives that you Googled how to make a bruise look better. Is that right?
Yes.
And in your second interview, you told detectives that you Googled how to make a bruise feel better. Is that right?
Yes.
But isn't it true that in actuality, and according to Defendant's Exhibit D, permission to publish? You didn't Google how to make a bruise look better, how to make a bruise feel better. You Googled how to get rid of a bruise. Is that right?
Yes.
And you would have Googled that the day that Hannah fell off the train, March 7th.
The morning of.
Okay. When Dad came to pick her up, do you remember telling Dad that she fell off the train at 4 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember telling Detective Mayer when he responded to the house on 3/8 that she had fallen off the train at 4 p.m. the day before?
Yes.
Ms. Partin, can you please look at how to get rid of a bruise on 3/7? Can you tell me the timestamp?
8 a.m., 48 minutes and 17 seconds.
All right. And is 8 a.m. before or after 4 p.m., ma'am?
It's before.
So when you said that you Googled it after she fell off the train, that wouldn't have been correct.
I'm not sure.
Did you hear it? She Googled how to get rid of a bruise on the morning of March 7th. But Lindsay, isn't it true that you told Hannah's father, Jason Weshee, as well as the police that Hannah fell and hit her head on the train and hit her head on the cement at 4 p.m. on that same day? So what I'm hearing is Lindsay is either a fortune teller, a time traveler, or a liar. How would she have known at 9 a.m. on the morning of March 7th that Hannah was going to fall off a toy train at 4 p.m. that night, and she'd need to find some sort of remedy to get rid of a bruise? Not how to make a bruise better, how to make it feel better, how to get rid of it so that people wouldn't see it. Is it possible that the bruise that Lindsay wanted to quickly get rid of happened much earlier on in that day? And Lindsay was afraid the bruise was so bad, she'd have a hard time explaining it away, so she'd need to find some quick home remedy like essential oils or vapor rub and salt to make some magic happen. So, in my opinion, my speculation, based on the evidence and the facts, it looks to me like that bruise probably happened early in the morning. It probably happened within a couple of hours of Hannah being dropped off. And so Lindsay wants to figure out how to make this bruise go away before Hannah's father, Jason, picks her up that night. And she's looking up all of these home remedies, but bruises, they don't get better as time goes on, especially the first day. They get worse, right? We all know that that's how bruises work. no matter how much vapor rub and salt you're putting on the bruise, it's still going to get worse. I know people think that essential oils cure everything, okay? It's like that father from My Big Fat Greek Wedding, like just spray some Windex on it. I know. The young living people are always up in my ear like, oh, you have an ailment? You can't sleep? I have an essential oil for that. Oh, you're sneezing? Essential oil for that. Oh, you're growing a third arm out of your hip? Essential oil for that. But listen, they're not magic. Nothing is going to make a bruise behave in a way differently than it organically and naturally behaves. So when the bruise didn't fade enough, when it didn't work, the vapor rub and the essential oils, Lindsay had to come up with a story of why that bruise was there when Jason picked Hannah up. Enter the toy train. And when Lindsay got home after going to the hospital on March 8th, and she realized her stepmother-in-law had picked up some toys and moved this toy train, she freaked out. And she was like, we need to put that train back exactly where it was so that I can illustrate to anyone who asks exactly what happened and where the bruise came from. And then Lindsay deleted that search, right? She deleted the early morning March 7th search about how to get rid of a bruise, but she left the other searches and many other searches undeleted in her internet history, searches that didn't contradict her time frame narrative, because even after coming home on March 8th, that's when she starts looking up like, oh, what essential oils are good for bruises and stuff. So she's trying to still continue to build her narrative after she's talked to detectives, after she's gone to the hospital. She's still trying to build a narrative.
We've gone through some other information that you deleted throughout this time. You didn't delete Celebrex, right?
No.
You didn't delete is vapor rub good for bruises.
No, ma'am.
You didn't delete what essential oils is good for bruises.
No, ma'am.
The only one that's showing here that you deleted is how to get rid of a bruise. Is that fair?
Yes.
The only one she deleted was how to get rid of a bruise, the search that was made on the morning of March 7th. Now, obviously, later her attorneys are going to be like, that's not the only search she deleted. It's the only search she deleted that had to do with Hannah and her bruise, right? She deleted other searches like, vacation homes and stuff like that. It's normal stuff that I would also argue gets deleted when you delete one search. Most people don't usually just delete one search. They'll delete everything from that morning or from the past 24 hours. That's how my phone works, at least. And I know Lindsay had an iPhone like I do, so just keep that in mind. I would also like to point your attention to the multiple Pornhub internet searches. So this is going to, I know it sounds random right now, but this is going to speak to my final conclusions when we talk about this at the end of the video. The next line of questioning posed to Lindsay is a bit more personal, and it goes into the state of her marriage as well as some personal struggles that she was going through. This line of questioning is to add context and to speak to Lindsay Partin's mental and emotional state in the days leading up to Hannah's hospitalization. Now, sadly, Lindsay appears to have had a miscarriage the previous February, and this appears to have been her second miscarriage that she'd suffered through. Lindsay agrees that it was fair to say she'd been going through a rough time at this point, but her husband, TJ, not her husband, but what she considers as her husband under the eyes of God, because she doesn't need a piece of paper, her husband, TJ, was a very supportive force throughout this ordeal.
And ma'am, I know this is a sensitive subject, but approximately early to mid-February, you had a miscarriage.
I did.
And this would have been your second miscarriage, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you went to the doctor on February 9th of 2018, and they couldn't find a heartbeat at that time.
Yes.
And I think you said in your interview that you were just waiting to pass it. That was how that process was going to go.
Yes.
Safe to say that you were going through a pretty rough time at that point.
I think any woman would be.
And you feel like you fit in that mold then of going through a hard time?
Yes, it's sad.
Your husband, TJ, he wasn't being extremely supportive though, was he?
He was. He said, we'll try again. But I tried not to talk about it too much. I mean, those are kind of intimate women things.
Do you feel like he was pretty compassionate?
Yeah.
Okay, I have to make a quick comment here. I think it's very interesting that Lindsay claims she didn't talk with TJ much about the loss of their child because they were intimate women things. To me, even before we get any deeper, this speaks to the relationship that Lindsay and TJ had at this time. Because if you can't turn to your partner during a terrible ordeal like this, then who can you really turn to? A pregnancy loss is not an intimate woman thing. It is intimate, but it's an intimate relationship thing that you truly can only share with one other person, the other parent. That's the only other person who's going to understand what you're going through. Let's keep going, because Lindsay said that TJ was there for her and compassionate, but a text that she sent to a friend showed that this was not really the case at all.
I'm drawing your attention to a text message that you would have sent on 2/11/2018 at 7:39 a.m. Can you please read that portion aloud?
I have a
There you go.
dead baby in my belly, and there's nothing I can do about it. My husband hates me and has no compassion. Wish I could just off myself, all the pain would go away.
Once again, not out of the ordinary that a man might not be super sympathetic or supportive to everything. But that is also very relatable, something that many women experience, something that many women would understand. So why lie? Why say that TJ was compassionate and supportive, only to then have to read out loud a text where you're claiming the exact opposite? So are you lying now, or were you lying then? She really wants to appear to have it all together. She's the perfect woman, the super mom with the perfect kids and the perfect husband and the perfect life. And while many are guilty of doing this every single day, Lindsay's not posting on Instagram. She's on trial for her life. If you aren't going to be honest at this point, are you ever honest? When are you going to tell the truth, if not now? Do you even know how to be honest? That's a question that I have, because I don't think she does. I think Lindsay has spent a long time lying about things, putting on a front, and I feel bad. I do have compassion for everything she's going through. Losing a child, dealing with stuff with her husband that we're going to get more into because it was not a perfect marriage, far from it. I do have compassion for this, but it's not an excuse. You can't get help if you're not honest about what's happening. You can't even help yourself if you're not honest about what's happening. So you stay in this vicious cycle. You stay in this horrible situation that continues to degrade your mental state. Lindsay testified that her marriage was fine. Sure, TJ worked a lot. Sometimes he worked long hours, and he wasn't able to be with her and the kids as often as she would have liked, but she understood that's the way it is. However, text messages sent from Lindsay to TJ beginning on March 6th until the evening of March 7th, they show that their relationship was actually very tumultuous at this point. So for some context, TJ worked for Smith Construction Corp., just like Jason Weshee, but unlike Jason Weshee, TJ did not come home to be with his kids after work. He'd often go out to the bars and drink with his friends, and sometimes he would even have friends over and they would get drunk in the garage, which was the case on the evening of March 6th.
And I think there's been some testimony about this, but you were fighting with TJ, amongst other things that we've already discussed, on March 6th. Is that right, over text message?
Yes.
Was it always over text message, or did it ever be in front of kids?
I'm sure there were some in front of the kids. We tried not to.
Ma'am, isn't it true that on 3/6/2018 at 8:29 p.m. you told TJ good luck ever seeing the girls when all is gone because you work too much and pick everyone else and we aren't waiting for you anymore? I didn't even know people were in the garage, of course, but I don't matter. F-U-C-K, the shop moving, your people are unbelievable, can't even trust you to behave in front of me at a banquet, let alone off at a shop done by a piece of SHIT bar. I'm sure I'll find you in. Is that right?
Object to the relevance, object to the character. Approach.
You continue to fight with him throughout the night? Is that fair?
Yes.
And on 3/6/2018 at 8:30 p.m., you say you will always pick hanging out and drinking with whoever over us. The only reason you got to see Vivian is because I let her out there. Otherwise, you wouldn't pick them. And then you turn her against me by being a fake or instead of telling her the truth. Is that right?
Yes.
Then later in the night, in that text message around 9:41 on the same date, we no longer have a relationship. Have fun at your new shop. We will see you when you make time for us, wherever we are. Is that right?
I've said that before, but yes.
And then 3 minutes later, you tell him we're done, go work and manipulate. Is that right?
Yes.
And you continue fighting with TJ on 3/7, do you not?
I believe so, yes.
3/7/2018 at 6:52 a.m. You tell TJ it's all about you and you know everything. So effing sick of it. Is that right?
Yes.
You tell him About a half hour later, have a good day worrying about your employees and Smiths, only people who matter.
Yes.
So you would have been sending these text messages while you're watching the children, is that right?
Hannah would have been there, KK wouldn't have been there. And my 2 kids would have been up.
And it continues on throughout that morning, 7:27. You're always sorry and blah, blah, nothing changes. If you really cared and really sorry, you would stop drinking and pick us. No reason to be drinking in the garage last night. Ridiculous. Is that what you said?
Yes.
And then it continues on into noon, 12:29 p.m. on that same day. The simple fact is we will never make it with the shop being moved. I'm not sitting here waiting for you any longer. Seriously over it. Selfish, all of you. Is that right?
Yes.
And it looks like you continue to fight at 8:21 p.m. on 3/7 with TJ. LOL, when you neglected them for years at the bar, get out of here. You no longer have control over me and the way I feel. We're going to bed. It's after 8. Sorry you work late every night. Is that what you said?
Yes.
And the last text message that you would have sent to him would have been at 8:21 p.m. on 3/7, where you said delusional. Is that right?
Yes.
So let's go over this because there's a lot that happened here. First of all, it seems like this has been going down for a while, okay? And there was testimony where Lindsay said, maybe TJ was having an affair. Maybe she was suspicious that he may have been cheating on her. And, TJ also seemed a little suspicious of Lindsay's relationship with Jason Weshee, at least according to her. He would sometimes get jealous and he'd be like, why do you guys have to talk? When he picks Hannah up, like, why are you guys doing this, et cetera, et cetera. So there's clearly stuff going on here between all of these people. So this marriage has not been great for a while. And in one of those texts, Lindsay claims that TJ has neglected his kids for years and he's been drinking like this for years. She alludes to, him embarrassing her at a banquet, possibly from, drinking. And Lindsay uses words and phrases to demonstrate how very hurt and upset she is about what her husband has been doing, and rightly so. I would be as well. Once again, relatable, understandable. Lindsay says things like, you work too much. We aren't waiting for you anymore. We no longer have a relationship. We're done. So effing sick of this. And suggests that the kids may have been put in the middle, with TJ possibly turning them against Lindsay. Now, in my experience, this isn't really a one-sided thing in marriages. If one parent is turning the kids against the other parent, it's usually happening on both sides. And the kids get put in the middle because Lindsay's feeling like, I'm the one home with them all the time. I'm doing everything. He's gone, and then he's drinking, and he's with his friends. I don't have a social life. I don't have friends. I don't get to go out and hang out with my friends. I'm always with these kids. Why should I be made to look like the bad parent? Why should I allow him to make me look like the bad guy when I'm the good guy? I'm the only good guy here. So this is typically, in my experience with marriages, and listen, people call me all the time for marriage advice. People I know, friends, family. I don't know why, because I think I'm a little blunt and I'll tell them, what I think they need to hear, not what they want to hear. But all the time, this is the story. This is the way it goes. It's a tale as old as time. So it was probably happening on both ends. But of course, Lindsay's not going to admit to that, right? Because she needs to look like the perfect parent, the perfect person, the perfect woman, the perfect wife. This is a pattern. In her interview with detectives, Lindsay made a passing comment about this as well. TJ's the fun parent. When he comes home and the girls haven't seen him all day, they are ecstatic to see TJ, but Lindsay's with them all day. She makes them brush their teeth and clean up their messes. She's not the fun parent. There's a lot of resentment here, once again, understandably. I think a lot of women can relate to this. I know I can, because there was a time where I was the stay-at-home parent and my husband was the one working long hours outside of the house, and then he'd come home and the kids would be all ready for bed and I'm exhausted and literally just feel like I'm picking up after them and like waiting on them hand and foot all day long. And then my husband would walk in and they'd be like, Daddy, they're so happy. And I'm like, really? Really? This is just normal. This is normal, but relatable. It seems like, in my opinion, Lindsay's situation wasn't ideal. Home with 4 small children all day long, trying to keep it all together, trying to get the housework done and prepare meals, all while TJ's out drinking with the boys, shirking any of his parental responsibilities. But we do have to look at the timeline. During the days that Lindsay claimed Hannah fell and got hurt, first on the gravel driveway on March 6th and then again on the concrete garage floor on March 7th, Lindsay's having these very heated exchanges over text with her partner. I think it's safe to say that she was probably in a very bad mood, and she may have been looking for someone to take it out on. And historically, this is very common. Psychologically, this is very common. There are accounts that show the wives of slaveholders were far more brutal to slaves than even the men were, even their husbands were. And why would that be? We know that women are far less likely to be violent, far less likely to be abusive, and far less likely to be killers. We have the stats to prove that. Yet, we have this time in history where women were reported to be horribly and violently abusive to another group of disenfranchised people. And you might think, this doesn't add up, that women in that time who were also stripped of their rights and considered property, considered not capable of running businesses or making important decisions, not allowed to vote, not allowed to own property, they would probably be more sympathetic to people who were also forced into submission, also considered property, also having their human rights taken away from them. But that's not always how it works. When someone is bullied, when they are pushed down, they sometimes go on to repeat that cycle. The abused becomes the abuser. And during this time, a woman may have been looking for someone who was even more oppressed than she, someone who could not fight back. A bully in the schoolyard doesn't approach the biggest, baddest kid who has a circle of friends around them. The bully will find the smallest, most unprotected kid to take their wrath out on. In Lindsay Partin's case, she couldn't take out her frustration on the person it was directed at, her husband, TJ, so she found someone smaller and weaker who could not fight back, someone she could use as a punching bag. Now, that's just my theory. Let me know what you think in the comments. We are going to move on to the testimony of Hannah's father, Jason Weshee. Now, something interesting that I heard during Jason's testimony is that Hannah was diagnosed with hepatitis C as a baby, but he claims he was not aware of this, which is why he didn't inform Lindsay Partin. This is important because when someone has hepatitis C, they bruise far more easily, which according to the defense might explain why Hannah had so many bruises.
Hannah had hepatitis C, is that correct?
I was not aware of that.
You weren't aware of the pediatrician records indicating she had hepatitis C?
We had her tested at birth and it came up negative, and she was retested, I want to say around 9 months, 10 months. And no, I was not aware that she had hepatitis C. I know her mother was hepatitis C positive, but I was not aware Hannah was hepatitis C positive, no.
Were you the sole caregiver taking Hannah to and from the pediatrician?
Yes, ma'am.
And you would agree with me that within those records, if the doctor indicated she had onset of hepatitis C in September of her birth year, that she had hepatitis C?
Yes, ma'am.
And you didn't tell Lindsay about that, or even TJ Smith, correct?
I was not aware of that, no.
Now I think it's pretty clear, and it is my opinion, that Lindsay Partin is responsible for what happened to Hannah Weshee. However, I'm still attempting to keep an open mind, and in reference to the hepatitis C conversation, I do find it believable. I find it believable that Jason didn't know, right? When babies are born to mothers who have hepatitis C, which Hannah's mother had, they don't always test positive for it at birth. Sometimes it takes about 2 weeks before the virus can be detected in the blood. Additionally, the baby may be able to clear the virus from its body on its own within the first 2 years. And there was some testimony that Jason failing to tell Lindsay this placed the other children at risk, but that's a fallacy. Hepatitis C is not transmitted by kissing, hugging, sneezing, coughing, sharing food or water, or casual contact. And children who are infected, they should not be excluded from school, play, or other childhood activities based on their infection status. I think it's quite possible that Jason missed the diagnosis because in the first year of Hannah's life, he was going through the gigs. His child was born addicted to heroin. Her mother was placed in a rehab facility. He suddenly became a single parent to a newborn baby. He was working, going back and forth to the children's hospital and the NICU to watch and see Hannah. And I'm sure there was a lot of medical stuff happening at that time, and the doctors were throwing a lot at him at that time, and he may not have just absorbed everything. And then he lost his job, and for some time he and his daughter were homeless. I do not believe he's lying about this, and we heard the prosecution say in closing arguments that the doctors considered hepatitis C as a possible issue, as a possible contributing factor, But when Hannah was tested, it came back negative, so it's likely she had cleared it from her system already, making it, in my opinion, a non-issue. So why is the defense talking about it? Moving on, the defense questions Jason about the fall Hannah allegedly took on the gravel on March 6th, and he confirms that both Lindsay and Hannah told him about this fall.
On Tuesday, March 6th, Lindsay told you about the fall on the gravel, is that correct?
She did tell me about the fall on the gravel, yes, ma'am.
And Hannah confirmed that to you, isn't that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember telling the detectives that you had given Hannah a bath and saw a bruise on her?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you remember asking Hannah about that bruise?
I'm not sure what specific bruise you're talking about. If I saw bruises on Hannah, I did ask Hannah.
Okay. Do you recall telling the detectives that you saw a bruise on her butt cheek?
Yes.
Okay. And that you asked Hannah what that was from?
Yes, ma'am.
And she said she fell on the step?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And would you agree with me that you also told the detectives that Hannah never says that Lindsay whoops her or beats her or is rough with her, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So Hannah confirming the fall on the gravel, it doesn't say much to me. It's not the gotcha moment that the defense thinks it is, in my opinion. Young children can be coached very easily. I could convince my 5-year-old to come in here right now and tell you that a unicorn flew into her room last night, pooped out rainbows, and then galloped out her window, and she would say it with a straight face. Additionally, Hannah may have fallen on the driveway while playing. She may have taken a tumble in the garage. Small kids, when they're playing, they fall all the time. Like, that's completely normal. But what the medical professionals are saying is that those types of falls, normal childhood falls, they don't cause the injuries that took Hannah's life. Then we do come to a point in Jason's testimony where I take a bit of an issue. Jason had told the police that on the evening of March 7th, after he'd picked Hannah up from Lindsay's, he and Hannah had gone to Walmart and they'd purchased milk. But on March 8th, when police were in his home and taking pictures, there was no milk in the refrigerator. Okay? No milk. That's clearly an inconsistent story. It was not until a year later, right before the trial, that Jason remembered what he had actually done on the night of March 7th. According to Jason Weshee, on March 6th, he'd had a friend over, and this friend had spent the night. And then on March 7th, Jason and Hannah had driven Jason's friend back to his house, and then they drove home and they fell asleep on the couch. Jason claims that he had just forgotten that he hadn't actually gone to get milk from Walmart on March 7th because he had intended to get it, but he just never did.
Would you agree with me that today is the first time you've told Detective Turner in this room that you didn't go get milk the night before, but instead you went to Fairfield?
No, ma'am.
When did you previously tell him that?
When I found out, Monday morning when we were in court.
Monday morning here in court?
Yes, ma'am.
So today being Tuesday the 9th, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So Monday, April 1st.
Yes, ma'am.
And you told him that when?
Yesterday. I found out Sunday, this past Sunday, and I told him that yesterday when I was in court.
You told him that, like, out in the hallway?
Out in the hall, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that in opening arguments, I indicated that your whereabouts for the night of the 7th of March were very important and suspicious. Doesn't have anything to do with that?
No, ma'am.
Zero.
Nope.
And it's not just all of a sudden, my friend Chris, is it Chris who stayed the night?
Christopher Davis, yes.
Yeah. All of a sudden, my friend Chris stayed the night, and I was driving him home on the 7th.
Yes, ma'am.
So you agree with me that you told the milk story, that you went to Walmart to get milk. You agree with me that you told that to the detectives at Fort Hamilton Hughes, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You told, again, that same story, that I went to Walmart to get milk on the evening of the 7th to the detectives at Children's Hospital, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you told that again to the social worker at Children's Hospital, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then all of a sudden, now you know, oh my gosh, my friend Chris was over the last night my daughter was alive in my house, and now I remember that I drove him to Fairfield. Is that what you're telling this jury?
Yes, ma'am.
That's what you're telling this jury.
Jason claims, obviously, during this time when he was first questioned by police, he was very worried about Hannah, her condition, and her care. And that was what was monopolizing his mind, and he just completely forgot. And I suppose it's possible that when Lindsay's lawyer mentioned something about Jason's whereabouts on the evening of March 7th being suspicious during her opening statement, it could have triggered something in his memory. He could have gone back over those events, and he did say that he'd talked to his friend Chris about it, and his friend Chris confirmed that, yes, March 6th was the night I spent the night at your house, and you guys drove me home on March 7th, and that was the last time that Chris had seen Hannah. It is a little odd, I do have to admit, because he was asked about this on March 8th, just the day after he and Hannah had driven Chris home. So I will give Lindsay and her defense team that. I'll give them that. Additionally, Lindsay's lawyer points out to the jury during their closing arguments that the police never questioned Jason the way they questioned Lindsay, and they never questioned Jason's friend Chris. They just saw that there was a discrepancy in his story, and they ignored it because they already felt they had the right person.
And what you want to know is that you have spent more time sitting in this room than the detectives bothered to look at a darn thing. A darn thing. But what did they never, ever ask for? Jason Weshe's phone. And why would you find that important? Because what he did, where he was, and who he was with, and that means Hannah was with, is absolutely, positively important to this case. Jason Weshee was consistent with his statement because they asked him, what did you do the night of the 7th? And he said, I picked up my child, I went to Walmart for milk, then we came home, and we were on the couch. First she played in her room for 10 minutes. And then she fell asleep on the couch. He was consistent with that. Well, on March 9th, Detective Turner got Lindsay Partin to say, I shook. And that's enough for them. They stopped there. Stop. How about this? Don't pay attention to that. That doesn't fit into her box. Lindsay already said she shook her. That's enough for us. You might say, well, gosh, Jason Weshee, he didn't say anything, and I think the prosecutor said that. That's right, he didn't. He was never put in an interview room. He was never taken to the station. He wasn't sat in a room for 4 hours. He wasn't shown photographs of this child. Was he? No.
Yo, you can tell that this defense attorney was the president of her drama club in high school. Am I right? It's a lot. She's a lot. But I also do want to mention that by the time the police had realized Jason had not gone to Walmart to buy milk, Lindsay had already confessed to hurting Hannah, hitting her, squeezing her, shaking her. So it does seem to make sense why they would feel there was no need for a further investigation, right? Because milk not being in your house, yeah, kind of makes you take notice, but a person confessing to physically abusing a child who died from physical abuse, a little bit more, concrete. I would have liked to have seen the detectives question Jason at the station, however. I would have liked to see him come in and have an interview like Lindsay's. But I also understand that in those early days, they most likely wanted to allow him to be by his daughter's side, which is the right thing. It's the right thing to do, which is another thing that Lindsay's lawyer brings up. And I find it to be ridiculous. She says Lindsay was basically like Hannah's mother. So why would they let the father go and be at the hospital but grill the mother?
He said at the hospital, and I give them credit. He's the father. But what did you just hear in this whole case? Miss Sheehan just said it. Oh gosh, she was like the mom to her. So we treated dad differently, but the pseudo mom, the one that had her for 12 hours, is different. They showed her the photographs, and worse yet, they told her she was dead. Dead. They didn't tell Jason that.
Like a mom. But Lindsay was not Hannah's mother. She was Hannah's babysitter. She had Hannah 3, maybe 4 days a week. She didn't raise her. She wasn't her mother. So in my opinion, that's just a silly point to make. But I do see how Jason's inconsistent statements look bad. And I also see how the defense may latch onto it and make it seem like Jason lied, because if he lied because he had something to hide. I get the line of questioning. I get where it's going. I get the point they're trying to make. I still don't find it enough to look at Jason over Lindsay. That's my opinion. Let me know what you think. So then Lindsay's defense lawyer, she begins harping on Jason's timeline on the morning of March 8th, like in excruciating, unnecessary detail. But Jason remains consistent throughout this line of questioning.
Correct? So now we're about 6:56? Correct?
No, not correct.
Doesn't take you a minute to get your 3-year-old child into the car?
When I walk up to the car and open the door, I set her in the car. I don't strap her in the car seat when we're going to Lindsay. So no, I didn't take the extra time to strap her in the car seat. I set her right in the car and we went to Lindsay's.
How long does it take you to get out the door?
A second. I mean, when I walk out the door, I just
1
walk out
second.
the door. Maybe 30 seconds.
Okay, so we're at 6:56 and 30 seconds when you get hand up to the car. You put her in the front seat, is what you're saying, correct?
No, no,
Is that what
ma'am.
you're saying?
No, ma'am.
You didn't put her in the front seat.
That's not what I'm saying either. I'm saying your timing's wrong. You're trying to twist my words.
I'm not trying to twist your
When
words.
I-
You told us
when
it
I
was
text
6:55 when you left the house. Do you recall that?
When I text Lindsay at 6:52, I was getting ready to walk out the door. So no, I'm not saying I sat there for another 3 minutes. No, ma'am, that is not correct.
Do you recall me asking you about this exhibit? Exhibit double Q?
Yes, ma'am.
Specifically, line 11 through 13, page
Yes,
8?
ma'am.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And you remember telling the detectives, I probably walked out the door at 6:55, do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am. I don't recall telling them that, but if it is in writing, I'm sure
Well,
I
I'll
did.
show it to you again, do you want to see it?
No, I believe you. I saw it. I read it.
So if you walked out the door at 6:55, 30 seconds to walk from your front door to your car that's parked in the driveway, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Open the front passenger side for Hannah.
Driver's side.
So you walk all the way around the car and put her in through the driver's side.
No, I don't walk around the car. When I pull up through my driveway to my front porch, when I walk out, I'm already in front of my car. Usually if I put her in the front, when I get in, she climbs on my seat and she'll climb in between.
You're parked nose in into the drive, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So the closest door to your front door of your car is the passenger side, correct?
When I'm carrying Hannah and I walk out.
Listen to me. That's my question.
I swear, between the guy who examined Dr. Carey and this woman, Lindsay picked the most obnoxious, the most condescending, the most disrespectful attorneys, and this did not bode well for her. We all understand that Jason Weshee needs to be questioned. But this attorney at times is asking him questions and then not letting him answer. She's barking orders at him. Listen to me. Who the hell are you? And no one wants to see the father of a little girl who died being screamed at on the stand. There is a way to get this information that you need without being a bitch. The prosecution at times was very firm with Lindsay Partin on the stand, but they never crossed a line. They never had to shout at her or try to confuse her or throw her off. And in my opinion, this is exactly what's happening. Where I believe the prosecution has the facts on their side, the medical experts on their side, the defense, not so much. So they have to resort to these sorts of tactics in order to get their desired outcome. The whole timeline she's walking him through isn't really relevant. She's just trying to throw Jason off. She's trying to get him to spontaneously confess to something, which are the same tactics that Lindsay and her defense team claimed the detectives used with Lindsay. But when they used them with Lindsay, it was wrong. But in this scenario, while the attorney's, cross-examining Jason, it's not wrong. You're going to have to be consistent. You have to be consistent with what you think is wrong and what you think is okay, what you think is allowed, what you think is morally reprehensible, what do you think is perfectly okay. You've got to be consistent because now you all just look like hypocrites and bullies. I also think it's possible that Lindsay's attorney may have been trying to get Jason to have an angry outburst on the stand so she could turn to the jury and say, look, this guy has a hot temper. He's a loose cannon. It's not hard to believe he could have lost his temper with Hannah. I mean, it's gross. It's gross, this kind of tactics, but, it doesn't work because Jason keeps his composure throughout and remains respectful throughout, even when he's not receiving respect. And I don't think I could have done the same, especially when we're talking about my child who's now dead. And I believe that your client did it. I don't know if I could have been so calm.
Your car is nose in,
Yes, ma'am.
correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You don't park in that little garage, correct?
No, ma'am.
Your car's outside, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You would agree with me that the closest door from your front door to the car is the passenger side,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
That was my question.
Yes, ma'am.
So now you're telling the jury that you didn't put her in the passenger seat door. You walked around around to the driver's side. Is that what you're saying?
I didn't have to walk around. I walked right in front of my car and we got in the driver's side. Yes, ma'am. I did not come out and go to the passenger side. I walked out, walked in front of my car, opened my driver's door, and we got in the car.
30 seconds, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you've already agreed with me that it was cold that day. You probably had snow on your car, correct?
Yes.
And you'd agree with me that your car doesn't immediately warm up, correct?
No, ma'am.
It does?
I said, no, ma'am, it does not immediately warm up.
Okay. And so you'd agree with me that you had to wait a little bit for the car to warm up before you put it in reverse, correct?
No, ma'am.
You didn't?
No, ma'am.
You immediately shoved that thing into reverse and got the heck out of the driveway?
Yeah, when I'm leaving for work, yes, ma'am, I started
Is
my
that when
car.
Hannah fell into the back seat and hit her head?
Hannah never fell in the back seat.
Are you certain?
I'm 100% certain.
I can't even with his attorney. It's like she got her degree from the School of John Grisham Dramatics. She really thought she did something there. Did she think that tossing this whole Hannah fell in the back seat and hit her head line, it was going to elicit Jason to accidentally say, oh yes, that is when she hit her head. That is exactly what happened. The defense attorney continues putting out random and unprovable scenarios.
Because if she fell in the back seat, climbing over the front seat, and hit her head, and it killed her, then you'd be responsible. Isn't that true?
I assume I would, yes, ma'am, but Hannah did not
So
fall in
that's
the
why you're
back
pretty
seat.
certain that that's not what happened.
No, ma'am.
So we're at 6:55, 6:56 and 30 seconds? You got to pull out of your driveway, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
That drive's pretty long, isn't it?
No, ma'am.
How far is it?
About from here to the doors, maybe?
Okay. So you're at a dead stop in your car that sat presumably all night long in the cold, and you shoved that thing in reverse. How long does it take you to get out into the main road of Shank?
Maybe 5 seconds?
Because you're driving fast?
No, I'm not driving fast, but it doesn't take me very long to back out of my driveway. My driveway wasn't very long.
You'd agree with me that your driveway has a slight curve to it, correct?
A little bit.
It's not a straight shot, correct?
Right at the top, it curves.
Right at the top where you'd have to turn your car, correct?
I would turn my wheel to leave my driveway, yes, ma'am.
So you're not in a straight, just shove it in reverse. You've got to actually turn the wheel and pay attention to what you're doing, correct?
Yes, ma'am, I
Unless,
did.
of course, your daughter's climbing over the seat, correct?
No, ma'am, she was already in the back seat.
And then you reverse it into this spot, correct?
I backed up onto Shank Road.
Okay. And you'd agree with me that at that time of day, there are other workers coming to Smith Construction, correct? Because you're all supposed to be there by 7.
Well, most of the workers go
Would you
out.
agree with me?
No, ma'am, I would not.
No other workers were heading down to the barn.
I can't say no other workers there, but the majority of the workers that work for that company, no, ma'am, they did not come to the shop. They worked out in the field, so they met their foremans at the job. Most of them did not come to the shop.
So the workers that are coming to the shop, you got to be careful for them. You don't want to back your car into them as they come around the corner, do you?
No, ma'am.
It's just ridiculous. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous. Hannah was crawling over the seats. You gotta pay attention to watch out for those other workers, because you know, at 6:50 in the morning, Shank Road is just bumper to bumper LA traffic style. Cars all over the place. Were you driving fast? What she's trying to do is make the timeline of the medical professionals work for her client. The doctor said that the injury that caused Hannah to collapse, her brain injury, happened within moments of her showing symptoms. So if this defense attorney can give some sort of explanation of how Hannah had been hurt that morning, right before Jason dropped Hannah off, it's reasonable doubt. But she doesn't do that, right? She just looks like a bully without a leg to stand on. The defense attorney then goes on to nitpick Jason's timeline after he leaves Lindsay's house and he gets to his work truck and he starts transferring his personal belongings from the car to the truck before he gets Lindsay's phone call.
And I think your testimony was that you had left the truck running.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
So if other witnesses say nobody ever went and turned your truck off, either the truck ran all day long sitting in the back of Smith Construction's pole barn.
I don't know how to answer that. I'm not sure who shut the truck off or if anybody did shut the truck off because I never went back down to the truck.
So if nobody shut the truck off,
Then it
you
ran all
didn't
day
start
long.
your truck, correct?
Oh, I definitely started my truck. It was running when I was down there.
Why didn't you take your truck then? You
Because-
just got a call that your daughter is unconscious.
Yes.
You're telling me that you have the wherewithal of getting in your car because what if I have to go to the hospital? I'm going to need my car. You didn't just jump in that truck. You just started it, put that thing in reverse, and hightail it up the street. Come on, are you kidding me?
No, I'm not. I didn't call her back until I was in my car. And that truck's a diesel, so you can't just start it and take off like that. I was in my car when I talked to her again, and I put it in drive, and I went back to her house.
The reason you didn't take the truck is because you didn't have the truck started, correct?
No, ma'am. That's false.
She's just like yelling at him and getting all screechy, and it's unnecessary and it's unproductive because she's really just trying to get Jason to admit to lying about these little details when in fact these little details aren't even really important to the evidence, to the case. She just wants to make him look like a liar. Now, during the defense closing arguments, this same attorney explains to the jury what reasonable doubt is, and she goes through certain words and statements that would be used and were used during the testimony of medical professionals, which she says do not equate to proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
This phrase, and I want to make sure, I wrote it on a sticky note, which is something I like to do. But I heard her say that she didn't have to, she just needed a reasonable explanation. Oh, my Lord. The standard of law is very clear. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you had a doubt based in reason and common sense, your verdicts are not guilty. That is what the law demands of you. That is what the law demands. It's not reasonable explanation. I love to use my chart because people who are not attorneys have a really hard time with that word, reasonable doubt.
First of all, what the hell is this look? What is this look? I can't take it. Second of all, reasonable doubt is not a word. It's two words, all right? It's hard to be accurate when you're being condescending. I know. It's a lot to handle at once in your brain. Okay, let's continue.
So just like when we were asking the doctors questions about trying to figure out what they meant by relatively, here are some words. If after hearing the evidence in this case, you think that Lindsay Partin did the things that they've accused her of, and that's the word you come into your head, your verdict is not guilty. If you think it's probably that Lindsay Partin did this, your verdict is not guilty. And on and on and on. And I'm coming down here because these are things that lots of people say. Clear and convincing evidence, strong suspicion, might have. These are the words that do not equate to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. All of those words means not guilty.
Now, in my opinion, this attorney is being a little misleading here because no one can actually know what happened to Hannah. They can examine the evidence. They can come up with a theory based on that evidence, based on their extensive expertise in the field, but no one can know. So oftentimes a jury will vote guilty because they think the evidence provided justifies that verdict. In a case like this, no one can know besides Hannah, who isn't here to tell us. And whoever did this to Hannah, and obviously that person isn't going to tell us. And what this tells me is the lawyer thinks that the jury is stupid, or at least she's treating them as if they are. The prosecution claimed that from March 6th to March 8th, Lindsay Partin had been consistently hurting Hannah. And as we know, Lindsay did not come up with a story on the spot. She'd already been building that narrative because she'd already been in a position where she had to explain to Jason why Hannah was not bruised when she arrived to Lindsay's house, but was bruised when she left. And I don't know why she keeps saying 30 seconds, because the actual time period between when Jason left Hannah at Lindsay's and when she called him to tell him that Hannah had collapsed, it's actually closer to a few minutes. A lot of people in the comment section, not a lot of people, like a handful of people, they were like, I just don't understand how this could have happened so soon after. And I do have to admit that I think a lot of those people are like Lindsay Partin supporters because I don't recognize their screen names. I've never seen them before. They're sort of like nameless, faceless screen names, without a profile picture, like they've just been created. So I'm gonna put that out there. But if you had watched the first video thoroughly, then you would know that's not the case. And you would also know that it does make sense. It does make sense that Lindsay would have hurt Hannah within minutes of her getting there. Lindsay said that she had shaken Hannah and yelled at her and poked her and stuff because Hannah was crying that her father had to leave. If Hannah was whining and crying that her father, Jason, had to leave, it makes sense that she would have been doing that within the first few moments of him leaving. And it follows that Lindsay would have hurt her, squeezed her, and shaken her out of anger and frustration within moments after Jason left. That was her claim to the detectives, after all, and that corresponds with the testimony of multiple medical health professionals. But wait, the defense had their own medical expert, a very prominent medical expert that we all know from other high-profile trials. A medical expert who was paid $7,000 for his testimony in this case. A medical expert who was 92 years old and who had to testify in court via video conference. Dr. Werner Spitz. Now, Dr. Spitz's testimony, it's too hard to understand because it's echoey due to him being on the television in the courtroom, and he already has that very thick accent. To be fair, I used to be a huge fan of Dr. Spitz's work. He is a world-renowned forensic pathologist. He's written several books. He has a career behind him that is illustrious, but he's also known to be a hired expert in the last decade or so. And after he testified on behalf of Casey Anthony during her trial, I lost some respect for him. After this trial, I lost the rest of it. Dr. Spitz testified that Hannah's brain injury could have happened from one single impact to the back of her head, what he referred to as a minimal force impact.
Dr. Spitz is the only doctor that explained lucid interval. And he indicated without question, without good cross-examination to get him off his opinion, that lucid interval turns on the brain swelling and the pace of the swelling. And he talked about that. And he talked really slow, and I kind of like that. He's got that great accent. And he said, there will be immediate and quick swelling with greater force. Immediate and quick swelling. And without the greater force, you're going to have an interval. What did he give you opinions as to what would show greater force? Skull fracture, coup and counter coup, or if the impact's here, coup and counter coup, and brain bruising. And those are three things that are absent from the medical evidence. You didn't hear a single doctor say that there was a skull fracture. I know you all took notes, and I bet you all agree with that. Not a single doctor said there was a skull fracture. And in regard to the coup and counter coup, Dr. Spitz explained that upon impact, you'll have a coup. So we have 2 doctors who saw the impact. 2 of all these doctors saw this impact. And I'm not going to show you the photograph. I know it's ingrained in your memory. Dime size, as he described it. Back of head, he showed you how a skull would hit a flat surface. Coup. So if you have a great force, coup, counter coup. There's no counter coup in the inside of her head. None. So this isn't a great force. The impact is not great. It did cause not bleeding in the brain. It caused brain swelling. And because the impact was not so great, you're going to have that interval.
Okay, so Dr. Spitz's opinion was that Hannah could have received a minimal force impact to the back of her head at some point before she arrived at Lindsay Partin's house. But within minutes of stepping foot into Lindsay's garage, enough time had passed where her brain had swollen enough to cause her to pass out. I think it sounds pretty legitimate, right? But then the prosecution gets up and responds to these statements.
So let's go through what he said. And I'm going to try to take it slow. And I know that you're tired and it's been a long day, but this medical evidence is important. And so I think we need to address it carefully. He spent a lot of time in his direct testimony talking about the bruise on the back of the head. That picture that we saw with the red dot in the middle, and he talks about it being larger than life, and I'll absolutely agree, and I tell you when we put it up on the screen there, it's larger than life, but that's the whole reason for the scale, so that you can compare it with what it would actually be in a real size. We talked about, showed you with the skull, how that impact occurs, and that nothing else can really be determined as a bruise. It's just blood draining, the gravity causing the blood draining from her surgery that she had. And I came back to him and I said, well, doctor, isn't it true that as a pathologist, the only way to really identify and determine whether it's a bruise or you're seeing that blood has drained is to look for crushed tissue. And his response was, well, yeah, I guess if you wanted to cut open the skin and look at that, you could. So then I showed him that we had States Exhibit 76 and 79, and you heard Dr. Dean talk about this. And I made him read from the coroner's report, States Exhibit 71, where Dr. Dean specifically noted 2 bruises externally that traveled all the way through into that subgaleal, that tissue portion of the head, crushed tissue, an additional 2 separate subgaleal hemorrhages once she opened up the skin in the back. 4 separate areas of crushed tissue. That's 4 separate impacts.
So apparently Dr. Spitz missed that part in the medical examiner's report, that once Hannah's autopsy was being done, they didn't just find one area of impact. They found 4 separate areas of impact. So what else did he miss?
He spent a lot of time talking to you about brain swelling. And he described how, yeah, you can't really tell anything because of brain swelling, it causes additional injury. And I actually followed up and said, so because of brain swelling, it's hard to tell when you look at the brain. It's probably important to go back and look at all the medical records. And he agreed. And then he said, well, because it's swollen, it's going to be a mess and mushy, and there's no way slides could be made, so you can't really look at it. Well, then I confronted him with the very fact that slides were made, and that he hadn't seen them, and he hadn't asked for them. And his response was, I don't need to see those, I know what I would see. But you heard from Dr. Dean, and you'll see within her report that she absolutely noted injury from swelling and noted additional hemorrhage. And the doctor even went on and described how those hemorrhages can look different. The difference between the hemorrhages from swelling and the hemorrhages from injury. But he never even looked at the slides. He didn't care enough.
Oh, snap. So Dr. Spitz didn't even bother to read the medical examiner's report? That's what it sounds like to me. Because he would have known that slides had been made. He would have been able to view them. But he doesn't need to see them. He's the great and powerful Oz, and his brain is so large and contains so much knowledge and information, he already knows what he would see. It was his opinion that the brain swelling would have made it too difficult to distinguish between brain swelling and brain injury. But the ME very clearly stated in her report and during the trial that she could and did see a difference.
But what he didn't talk about was anything about the examination of the posterior neck. The hemorrhages that were seen, and the nerve fibers, the spinal cord hemorrhages. He talked about brainstem injury. He didn't talk about that. And Dr. Dean told you that that shows you the tremendous force that went through this child. Went through that area of this child. Submit to you that these were either missed entirely or they were ignored because they didn't comport with his minimal force opinion. When confronted with the optic nerve sheath hemorrhages and asked about force, he claimed initially that these optic nerve sheath hemorrhages could be caused by this minimal force impact that he's talked about repeatedly, how that wasn't much force to the back of the head because you don't see enough injury there. But it was enough to cause this. And I came back to him specifically from his textbook and quoted that hemorrhages within the optic nerve are practically indicative of shaking. And he said, well, yeah, it can be shaking too.
Wow. That's got to hurt though, right? As a credible expert witness, as a credible medical expert, to claim something so absolutely and then to have someone read to you your own words from your own published work. Ouch. Ouch, Dr. Spitz.
Conversation about coup and contra coup, the injuries. And I specifically addressed that with Dr. Spitz. And again, I read to him from his book that many experts believe that aggressive shaking of an infant itself can cause death. Evidence in support of this opinion includes witness accounts and detailed confessions in which shaking without impact is described. It is generally accepted that the presence of an impact site partially depends on the nature of the impacting surface. Also, infants do not typically show the characteristic contra-coup contusions that are seen in adults who sustain a scalp impact. And he agreed that it is not uncommon for a young brain to not show a coup and contra-coup, I'll say it right, contra-coup injury. He agreed that that's true. And yet he wants you to find that that's significant, that she didn't have that kind of injury, when he knows that you shouldn't expect that in a young child. He puts that in his own book.
Okay, so when they're talking about coup and counter-coup, it's in reference to a brain injury that occurs both at the site of the trauma as well as the opposite side of the brain. This is seen a lot in car accidents, right? If your head hits the steering wheel, goes forward, you're going to see an injury where your head hit. And also you're going to see an injury at the opposite side of your brain. And this happens because the brain is the consistency of firm pudding. And so it jiggles, it moves around in the skull. So the brain itself slamming against the skull is going to cause that counter-coup injury where it hits the skull. The defense and Dr. Spitz mentioned that the absence of a skull fracture was important because Hannah didn't have one. Well, if she had been shaken, she would not have had one. As I stated in the previous video, the action of shaking would have turned her skull into a weapon on her brain. She didn't need to hit her head on the cement to cause brain injury.
There's no skull fracture. There's never been an alleged skull fracture. Absolutely agree. Yet there was a very large subdural, and he didn't even know it. He went on and on about this wasn't that forceful, and you know why? Because there's only 40 mLs of a hemorrhage removed from her brain at autopsy. Only 40 milliliters. That's not significant. That's not sufficient enough. And then he talked a little bit about the hemicraniectomy, and I finally asked him, Doctor, why'd Hannah have that? I guess to remove the subdural if there was a subdural. All right. I know they put in a pressure monitor. Okay. Doctor, are you aware? Did you review those surgical notes? Are you aware of what they found? Are you aware of the subdural hemorrhage? Where they found 250 milliliters? I was not. That's a lot. Page 119 from State's Exhibit 8. 250 milliliters estimated blood loss. This is just the brief procedure note showing date of service 3/8 of 2018, 11:40. Right-sided decompressive hemicraniectomy. No drain nor ICP monitor left. Multiple hemorrhagic cortical veins found and controlled. Closure was difficult with persistently herniating brain. Scalp closed with multiple full thickness interrupted and running nylon sutures. Dr. Spitz tried to tell you that those are staples. They're not. They're sutures. Page 105. Here's where you get the full detail. Here is exactly where Dr. Spitz, if he was doing his job, should have gone. If he wants to know what the injury is that caused this child's death, this surgical note is absolutely it. Procedures performed: emergent right-sided decompressive hemicraniectomy with evacuation of acute subdural hematoma. Estimated blood loss approximately 250 milliliters.
Dr. Spitz said in his testimony only 40 milliliters of blood was removed from Hannah's skull, but he was wrong. He talks about the surgery that Hannah had on her brain and her skull, and the prosecutor asked him, why would Hannah needed to have the surgery? He didn't even know that the surgery had been performed because Hannah had a subdural hemorrhage. He knew the surgery had been performed, but he didn't know it was because she had a subdural hemorrhage. So it's pretty clear to me that Dr. Spitz didn't even really review Hannah's medical information and records before testifying on the behalf of Lindsay Partin. And the prosecutor does a really good job of showing us that Dr. Spitz basically phoned the whole thing in. He may have scanned the notes. He may not have. But he certainly didn't thoroughly read them. Because if he had, he would have known that Hannah had a subdural hemorrhage. He would have known how many liters of blood were actually evacuated from her skull, and it wasn't 40, it was far more. And he would have known these very basic facts and details. Honestly, I'm embarrassed for him. I'm embarrassed for him, and I doubt I will ever take his opinion seriously again. Dr. Spitz says oh, it's really important that we don't see the counter coup and the coup injuries in Hannah. But then in his own book, he says you don't often see those counter coup and coup injuries or coup and counter coup injuries. You don't often see those in young children. What is going on here? Lindsay Partin was found guilty of the murder of Hannah Weshee. Not only that, she was found guilty of additional counts of child endangerment and involuntary manslaughter, and she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. So technically, she was sentenced to 15 years to life, and I bet you she gets out. I bet you she gets out after 15 years, maybe less, probably less. But of course, Lindsay did appeal her conviction in 2020, and in her appeal, Lindsay brought up several points that we will discuss now. First, she claimed that the state had failed to disclose information that they had knowledge about another individual who'd been with Hannah hours before she collapsed. Now, this is in reference to Jason Weshee's friend Chris, who'd spent the night at the Weshee home on March 6th and who'd been driven home by Jason and Hannah on March 7th. Now, I personally would say that the evening of March 7th is several hours before Hannah collapsed on the morning of March 8th, but okay, yeah, I guess hours. But when you say hours before, it kind of seems like maybe 2-3 hours, but we're talking over 10 hours before. But okay. Lindsay and her team claimed that if they had known about Chris, they would have modified their defense strategy to expand the list of alternate suspects to include Chris. But in the appeal, the response to this, the response from the appeal court, it states that the presence of Chris at 3003 Shank Road on March 7th was inconsequential because both Jason and Lindsay had testified that Hannah was acting normally on the morning of March 8th. And the medical evidence established that Hannah would not have been walking, talking, or asking her father for double kisses after receiving the injuries that led to her death. The response to the appeal says, quote, thus, the medical evidence and Partin's own statements served to exonerate both Jason and Chris as potential suspects, end quote. There's also a mention in this appeal that says Jason's claim as to his travel that evening was corroborated by a neighbor who lived on Shank Road and testified that she observed that Jason's car was not parked at 4004 Shank Road when she drove by at 8 p.m., but was parked at 8:40 p.m. So basically, it doesn't matter. Chris can't be a suspect because Hannah's injuries happened too soon before her collapse for his presence there on March 7th or March 6th to have made any difference. Lindsay's appeal also alleged that the court should not have allowed Dr. Makaroff to testify in regards to her opinion on bruising patterns, and they alleged that Dr. Makaroff's opinion was a new theory and had not been disclosed in writing to the defense, which did not give them a chance to contradict it. Now remember, Dr. Makaroff was the doctor who was brought in to testify on child abuse. She was a child abuse expert. Now the response to this in the appeal found that Dr. Makaroff wrote an opinion letter about these bruise patterns, and it was dated December 14th, 2018, and it was provided to the defense in a timely manner. Lindsay's defense had that letter with all of that stuff in it. And remember, Dr. Makaroff's statements were that she believed Hannah's bruising injuries were due to non-accidental child abuse, and multiple other doctors provided their own corroborating opinions, concluding the same. So basically what the appeal's saying is if all these other medical professionals claimed the same, then Lindsay's defense did have time to formulate an argument against those claims. So this is a non-issue once again. Next, Lindsay claims she had ineffective counsel. I'd have to agree with her there. Those lawyers were terrible. However, the appeals court did not agree. Her lawyers may have been terrible people, but they gave her a proper legal defense as well as they could have, I guess, considering the evidence that was stacked against her. Lindsay said that her legal team failed to suppress her interviews with the detectives. And Lindsay argued that since the trial strategy focused on the alleged coercive nature of the second interview, that her lawyer should have moved to suppress that interview on the grounds that her confession had been coerced out of her. Now, the response to the appeal says, quote, Partin does not articulate how her interview was coercive or present any argument indicating why a motion to suppress in her case would have been successful, end quote. The appeals court reviewed both of Lindsay's interviews, and they concluded that they didn't believe the detectives acted coercively in obtaining Lindsay's confession at all, stating, quote, while the two detectives repeatedly pressed Partin to tell them the truth about what had happened that morning and informed her that her version of events did not match what Hannah's doctors were informing them, Neither detectives nor demeanor escalated to anything approaching threatening or coercive. To the contrary, both detectives used the tactic of conveying sympathy and understanding as to why Partin may have been frustrated with Hannah's, quote, mischievous behavior and with personal problems in Partin's life that she could have harmed Hannah, end quote. The appeal goes on to say, in addition, Partin testified that she gave the detectives a false confession in order to protect everyone. She did not claim that she gave a false confession because the two detectives coerced her. For the foregoing reasons, Partin has not demonstrated that her attorneys provided constitutionally deficient legal assistance based upon an alleged failure to file a motion to suppress her interview. Now, of course, Lindsay would want her interview to be suppressed because in that second interview where she claims she was coerced, even though she says she stopped telling the truth after an hour, that's when she admits to everything she did to Hannah. That's when she admits that she hurt Hannah. Lindsay also argued that her attorneys provided ineffective assistance by failing to object to Jason's testimony about his whereabouts on March 7th and his friend Chris. I mean, I don't think that they did. They thoroughly cross-examined him. I mean, the one attorney was like screeching at him, so they definitely brought it up. The response to that in the appeal says, however, for the same reasons discussed in response to Partin's second assignment of error, whether Jason drove to Walmart or drove with Chris and Hannah to Fairfield, and whether Chris stayed at the home on March 7th was ultimately immaterial to the state's case. Once again, not pertinent because the timeline doesn't add up. I mean, she says a lot. She says a lot in this appeal. She says that the prosecution unfairly tried her using inference stacking. The appeal says, quote, impermissible inference stacking involves drawing an inference based entirely upon another inference unsupported by any additional facts or another inference derived from facts. Lindsay argued that because Jason testified that Hannah told him about her fall on the gravel, the jury then had to infer that Hannah lied to Jason about falling. Partin also argued that the jury had to infer the bruise on Hannah's body were from Partin committing acts of torture or cruel abuse or excessive punishment. So basically, Lindsay's saying, well, if Jason said, yeah, Hannah told me about the fall on the gravel, then the inference the jury is going to take from that is that Hannah lied. And so therefore, the only way Hannah could have gotten her injuries was from Lindsay. This is stupid. This is stupid. Hannah may have not lied. Hannah may have been coached to say that by you, Lindsay, okay? And also, Hannah may have fallen on the driveway. There's no inference to take from that. There's no, assumption. We don't know what happened. What we do know is you confessed to hitting, punching, shaking, squeezing, and hurting this young girl. There's no inference to take from there. You said it with your own mouth. Your own stupid mouth. Lindsay's appeal was denied, obviously, but there are those who still fight for her release and claim her innocence and go on with your bad selves, That's the justice system. That is the beauty of the justice system. The justice system sucks in most cases, but the beauty of it is that you are allowed to believe whatever you want and fight for her however you want, and Lindsay can keep appealing if she wants. Melinda Cook Howard, Lindsay's attorney, said, quote, she's an upstanding citizen, mother, wife, and has the support of her community. End quote. That doesn't seem to also be the case. There does seem to be loud voices from her community saying that Lindsay's great and this and that, but there are also people in the community who were in my comment section saying that they were in this area at this time and there was a lot of biased news coming out because of Lindsay's position in the community. So it may not have been that she had the support of her community. It may have been that her community wasn't necessarily getting all the true facts. There's a Facebook page dedicated to Lindsay claiming that she is the mother of 2 young girls who need her. Some of the posts say that Lindsay is an incredible mother. She does ministry with the church. She's never abused her own children, etc. And all of those things can be true. They can all be true, but it can also still be true that Lindsay's responsible for what happened to Hannah Weshee. These things are not mutually exclusive. However, there is a twist, and this is crazy. In October of 2019, Timothy J. Smith, also known as T.J. Smith, he was indicted on 4 counts of gross sexual imposition and 2 counts of rape involving a child under the age of 10. T.J. Smith, the fake husband of Lindsay Partin, the father of Lindsay Partin's 2 young daughters. Now, according to the article, the alleged crimes happened in May of 2019. This adds a new wrinkle, right? And it also makes me wonder what exactly was going on in that house and with that family. It's terrifying to think that there were 2 small girls living there and 2 other small girls regularly being watched there when a potential child predator occupied the home. And I only say potential because as far as I can tell, he has not been convicted yet. He was just arrested and charged. I don't know. I definitely think that they have enough proof to indict him. They probably have enough proof to charge him, but you can draw your own conclusions from that. I will mention, however, Lindsay said in the court during the trial, she wanted to protect everyone, including her husband, TJ. So what was she trying to protect him from is the question. Let's just spitball here. Let's just throw some theories out, use some independent thinking. Is it possible that Hannah may have been being abused? Maybe she was getting to the age where she may have started talking and expressing this abuse. And I don't mean just the physical abuse from Lindsay. I mean possible sexual abuse. And is it possible that that's what Lindsay was trying to protect TJ from? Now, this doesn't mean she's innocent. This doesn't mean she didn't physically abuse Hannah. It's horrendous to think that both of those things could have been happening at once, that Hannah could have been in a home where the woman of the house was physically abusing her and the man of the house was sexually abusing her. And that's just alleged. I don't know if that's what happened. I'm just saying it's just a thought. It's just a theory. Allegedly. Don't come for me. It is scary to think that, though, isn't it? And, there could be multiple reasons why Lindsay felt the need to hurt Hannah. And that's, kind of where we're coming in with the final thoughts. It's clear to me that Lindsay was a woman who was not happy, but she wanted everybody to think she was happy. It's clear to me that Lindsay was a woman who did not have a perfect life, who did not have a perfect marriage, but she wanted everybody to think that she did. It's clear to me that Lindsay was human, just like the rest of us, and she was prone to times of resentment, prone to feelings of sadness, depression. She was going through a lot. She just lost a child, and that's going to cause an emotional hardship on you no matter what. She was going through a bad relationship with her husband / partner, whatever you want to call him, the father of her children. She was basically taking care of these children all on her own, and she felt powerless at times. I think she was also a little bit resentful that Hannah and Jason Weshee had such a good relationship, that Jason loved his daughter. And although he worked a lot, he did it to take care of Hannah. And when he was done with work, he came home, he picked up Hannah, and they went back home to their house together, and they spent time together, and he gave her a bath, and he read to her, and he played with her, and he loved her, and he spent time with her instead of going out with his buddies and drinking. I think there was some resentment there, that Jason was maybe the father that Lindsay wanted TJ to be, and so she took it out on Hannah. I can't say exactly what happened, but I can say that I definitely believe Lindsay Partin did this. She's in the right place. She's guilty of this. She confessed to it. There's no reason why you would confess to the things you confess to, which are illegal, and think you're not going to get in trouble for it. You're not going to say those things in an interview with detectives and think that it's not going to come back to bite you. She confessed because she thought that they would understand. She confessed because she also claimed that Jason had told her she could punish Hannah, that she could use physical discipline. So the father gave me permission to use physical discipline. I used physical discipline. And as a result, this happened. But it's not my fault because I had the green light. It doesn't matter. As a grown adult, you know the force you can use. I don't agree with physical discipline for children at all. But I know some people do. Some people spank or, whatever. And whatever, that's your thing. If you want to do that, if you want to spank, I'm not going to judge you. I don't like to judge people. But there's a difference between, tapping a kid on the butt, which is going to be enough to upset them, to know that you're upset with them, and punching them under the chin, poking them in the chest so hard that you leave bruises, shaking them, squeezing them. You know that this is a very small child, and you know that you are bigger and stronger than this child. And you know the amount of force that you can use to safely discipline a child, and you went above and beyond that. You know that you did. Why Lindsay thought she was cute and charming enough to get away with confessing to these things scot-free, I don't know. She must have had a very charmed life. She must have manipulated a lot of people before with her cute little I'm just a good mother, and I love all kids, and we have such a great time. And yes, it's a lot. It's a lot having all these small children around, but it's so rewarding. I love it. I wouldn't have it any other way. Yes, my husband, he works a lot, but I love him and he does it for us. I don't hold it against him at all. Everything's perfect. Oh, you want me to show you what happened? Oh, yeah. So, she fell and I was like, Hannah, buddy, come on, Hannah. What's going on? I may have shaken her. Maybe I did. I didn't really shake her that hard. Just like, Hannah, what's going on? You guys believe me, right? Because I trust you. You trust me, right? Because I trust you. Why did she think that was going to work? I don't know. She deserves to be where she is. I don't think she should ever get out And if she does, I hope that she learns from this. And I hope that Lindsay and TJ's kids are okay. I really hope. I'm sending my thoughts out to them because both of their parents are train wrecks, man. Both of them. But let me know what you think about this case in the comment section. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to follow me on social media. Handles in the description box. Don't forget to follow my podcast, Crime Weekly, that I co-host every week with retired police detective Derek Lavasser. New episodes come out on podcast platforms every Friday, and that episode goes up on YouTube the following Wednesday. Thank you so much to my Patreons, who I appreciate with all my heart. Stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe, and I'll see you very soon.
Don't break now, and the battle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood.